Tra bod Richard yn cynhesu, na I ofyn y cwestiwn cyntaf I ti, Craig, sef beth yw'r rhaglen weithgaredd y deml heddwch ac iechyd I sefyllfa Wcrain? Dwi'n gwybod bod ni fel Academi Heddwch wedi cydweithio gyda'r deml yn cynnal nifer o ddigwyddiadau, 2 o leia ar-lein yn barod a wedyn 1 yn y deml I hunan. Oes na rhywbeth arall tra bod fi yn paratoi fy nodiadau fan hyn ar gyfer cyflwyno Richard?
Okay.
Craig.
Well, actually, probably rather perfect timing because I can share something that's so hot off the press. It isn't actually off the press yet, but I'll just pop into the chat. I'm not sure if that's gone to everyone or just the panel. We've just been putting together a homepage that draws together a whole load of different threads of work that WCIA has been involved with or supporting, and I think that's very important to recognise that this is a really civil society-wide effort from communities all over Wales. But yeah, I think pretty much from the day of the invasion, I think that sense of horror and shock that I think we all shared was also reflected, I think, in the efforts to try and just do something about it. And so, as well as the events that have been facilitated through Academi Heddwch, we've been trying to just facilitate as much information as exchange as possible. So the page that I've just popped on, just wcia.org.uk/Ukraine, is a page that we've updated to bring all those threads together, from the DEC appeal and the Voices for Ukraine to linking into Ukrainian community groups, educational resources for schools, efforts of International Women's Day and groups, and of course Wales's Nation of Sanctuary efforts. There are so many threads there that the best I can offer is to explore further, and do feel free to get in touch if you have any.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, dwi'n siŵr bod hwnna yn ateb teilwng. Wel nawr te, mae'n bleser mawr gen I gyflwyno yr athro Emeritus Richard Bowen o Abertawe. Mae rhaid nôl yn y gorffennol pell, Richard, a buoch chi a fi ar y campws ar yr un pryd, ond o'n I ddim yn adnabod yn gilydd bryd hynny. Un o'r pleserau mawr fi wedi cael gyda gwaith yr Academi yw derbyn yn ddigymell cysylltiadau gan bobl sy'n allan yna yng Nghymru eisiau dod ynghlwm â'r gwaith, a Richard Bowen yn un o'r cyntaf nath yrru neges I ddweud, dwi'n aelod o gymdeithas peirianwyr dros heddwch. Wel, o'n I wrth y modd I glywed bod y fath beth I gael, a bod y fath beth I gael yng Nghymru. Felly, croeso mawr iawn. Mae Richard yn un o gymrodyr yr Royal Academy of Engineering. Mae ymrwymiad I ddefnyddio peirianneg I hyrwyddo heddwch, iechyd a llesiant wedi cael ei ddisgrifio mewn sawl erthygl ac mewn o leia 2 lyfr, pethau fel yr Engineering Ethics, Outline of an Aspirational Approach, ac Engineering Ethics, Challenges and Opportunities. Y 2 gyda llaw gan y Springer Verlag, os ydych chi wedi cael gafel mewn copi, a gyda llaw mae'r ail lyfr yna wedi cael ei gyhoeddi hefyd mewn Tsieineeg. Felly mae dylanwad Richard yn mynd ymhell o Fro Gwyr, lle mae e'n byw, dros y byd I gyd. Mae wedi golygu a wedi cydweithio gyda bobl yn yr Unol Daleithiau ar Peace Engineering, ac yn wir mae ei ymrwymiad i'r maes yn ddwfn, yn hir hoedlog, am braint ni yw ei fod yn un ohono ni, os hoffech chi. Felly ydy mae wedi darlithio ledled y byd ar y pynciau hyn, ond heddiw mae yma gyda ni yng Nghymru, ac mae yna edrych ymlaen yn fawr, Richard, at glywed beth sydd gyda chi ddweud. Gan bod Aled Singleton, fel soniais I rhag ond bod chi ddim ar y dechrau, yn rhan o brotest, ac ni'n parchu hynny wrth gwrs. Mae yna 2 brifysgol yng Nghymru ynghlwm â'r gweithgareddau hynny heddiw. Byddwn ni ddim yn ei glywed ond gobeithio rhywbryd eto bydd modd recordio yr hyn fyddai fod wedi ganddo fe i'w ddweud. Felly be newn ni ydy gwrando arnoch chi, Richard, yna bydd cyfle I bobl holi, chithau, ond hefyd Craig ar ei gyflwyniad sydd wedi bod yn mynd yn y cefndir ers diwrnod neu 2 ac sydd yn y ddolen mae Amira wedi ei rannu gyda ni. Felly, drosodd ata chi, Richard. Diolch.
Hey, thank you very much for your introduction. I'd like to say that engineering makes numerous vital contributions to health and well-being. These include, as we've heard, clean water production and sanitation, energy generation, functional buildings, hygienic food processing, pharmaceutical manufacture, and medical diagnostic equipment. Indeed, access to clean water and sanitation is recognized as the most important contributor to improved health on a worldwide basis in the last 2 centuries. For example, a few years ago, the British Medical Journal published a supplement entitled Medical Milestones, celebrating key advances since 1840. The benefits of 15 advances were highlighted, such as anesthesia, antibiotics, DNA structure, evidence-based medicine, germ theory, immunology, medical imaging, and so forth. In a subsequent poll of readers, the highest rated advance was sanitation. And this is, of course, not a medical advance, but an engineering advance. Yet, as we've heard, billions of people in impoverished countries still lack adequate provision of sanitation and clean water. Engineering also makes pernicious contributions to war. Modern warfare would be impossible without the engineering design, manufacture, and use of a great diversity of devastating and indiscriminate weapons. The death, injury, and destruction being caused in Ukraine and many other places in the world is only possible through the use of engineering. Worldwide military expenditure is enormous, at least $2 trillion US. That's a sum that's difficult to imagine. In comparison, for example, the retrospective diplomatic budgets of both the UK and the USA are about 7% of the respective military budgets. And UK funds specifically allocated for peacekeeping in the diplomatic budget, mostly to meet UN obligations, are only about 2% of the military budget. Again, it's been calculated that over a 15-year period, 1.4% of the world annual military expenditure could provide simple clean water and sanitation for all, and 8% of world annual military expenditure could provide services approaching Western standards for all. I mention this because budgets show where the real priorities lie among our leaders. But as an engineer, it's important that we consider the root causes of violent conflict. And 4 factors have been identified as root causes of much current and future insecurity and conflict. The first, as we've already heard, is climate change, leading to loss of infrastructure, resource scarcity, and mass displacement of peoples, causing civil unrest, intercommunal violence, and international instability. The second is competition over resources, including food, water, and energy, especially involving unstable parts of the world. Thirdly, marginalization of the majority world, increasing socioeconomic divisions, and the political, economic, and cultural marginalization of the vast majority of the world's population. And fourthly, global militarization, the increased use of military force as a security measure, and the further spread of military technologies, including chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons. However, the knowledge and skills of engineers can allow them to make significant contributions to ameliorate these root causes rather than to win wars when they occur. For example, development of renewable energy sources and transition to low carbon energy economies can reduce global climate change. Again, improved efficiency, better recycling, and the introduction of innovative processes and materials can reduce resource competition. Generation of wealth through the introduction of appropriate engineering processes in impoverished societies can diminish marginalization. And reducing or halting weapons development and production and thereby reducing trade in arms, can limit militarization. So it's actions such as these that form the basis of peace engineering. Peace engineering we consider to be the use of engineering in the promotion of peace, where peace is understood as an absence of conflict characterized by relationships between individuals and social groupings of all sizes based on honesty, fairness, openness, and goodwill. Key features of this approach include, firstly, the provision of practical solutions to local needs, whether they arise from competition for resources, economic marginalization, climate change, or other factors. Secondly, activities that commit persons and communities in potential conflict to common projects of benefit to all. And thirdly, the provision of non-violent means of meeting human needs and of preventing the buildup of tensions, both of which are presently associated with the temptations of preventive or preemptive military action. And we've already heard some reference to these ideas in previous talks. So notable aspects of peace engineering include respect for the full and equal human status of every person, the congruence of non-violent means and ends in the promotion of peace, and recognition that peace involves much more than the absence of conflict. As has been mentioned, we've published and worked a good deal on this area. For example, we've published a book called Peace Engineering, where personal values and engineering careers converge, where 16 engineers from world leaders to students describe their commitment to use engineering in the promotion of peace. Some describe intensely practical activities, others elucidate the conceptual basis of such work. Some describe lifetimes of realized contributions, and others describe shorter-term projects, for example, student projects, work in progress, or challenging aspirations. Another aspect of our publication work has been publication of books like Engineering Ethics, Challenges and Opportunities, for which there's a Chinese version. We should have a Russian version, I think, and we don't have a Welsh version. The central concern of these works is, can the technical innovation of engineering be matched by a corresponding innovation in the acceptance and expression of ethical responsibility? And it's worth noting, I think, now that all engineering courses in the UK include teaching about engineering ethics. So I'd like to give two specific examples of peace engineering. The first comes from Sri Lanka, from an area known as Gal Oya. So this was a region that had experienced repeated violent ethnic conflict, civil war, and an inadequate irrigation system was a source of continuing tensions between Sinhalese farmers living upstream and Tamil farmers living downstream. The system was updated with an emphasis on participation of all potential beneficiaries with remarkable social results. The Sinhalese farmers voluntarily reduced their water use in order to make more available to the Tamil farmers. Sharing of water continued even in a severe dry season, and despite efforts of Tamil Tigers during the long civil war, the cooperation continued, with Sinhalese farmers protecting Tamil project staff and farmers. So the Gal Oya scheme promoted reconciliation through a generous and compassionate approach that involved both technical and social ingenuity. The second example I'd like to mention is that of Lucas Aerospace. Lucas Aerospace was a military equipment manufacturer. Engineering staff prepared for the management a comprehensive alternative business plan detailing a range of peaceful, socially useful products that could be made with their skills. Products were proposed for use in both developed and developing countries, and many were of strikingly prescient originality, including medical equipment, energy technology, water technology, and transport. The company management rejected this innovative and commercially promising approach, planning instead to rely on cost-plus military contracts. Lucas Aerospace no longer exists. However, many of the proposed products have been successfully developed elsewhere. So that's a very important aspect of peace engineering, converting military production to socially useful production. Like a previous speaker, I'd like to suggest a productive theme for the Wales Peace Academy, a generalization of peace engineering to other professions. There's a substantial gap between elite level decision-making by governments and international bodies and the activities of grassroots communities. This could be remedied by each person's professional activities understood in the broad sense of a person's work activities. Such activities are particularly relevant for a number of reasons. The actions of professionals have an immense impact on well-being and agency, both within and between communities. Professional activities are essential and a major commitment for many persons. They're not optional activities for free time. Professionals are widely dispersed in different types of communities and different geographical locations. And finally, and very importantly, professional activities can take place across state boundaries without many of the restrictions that limit high-level national or international initiatives. But perhaps the most important for us all is the imagination of peace. We need to be able to imagine peace as a positive contribution of society, not merely as an interim between wars, as several previous speakers have emphasized. The Welsh-Russian-American poet and peace activist Denis Levertov pointed out that none of us knows what a truly peaceful world society might feel like. Her poem, Making Peace, begins, "A voice from the dark called out, the poets must give us imagination of peace to oust the intense, familiar imagination of disaster. Peace, not only the absence of war." All of us, whether poets or not, need to learn to imagine peace and to work toward it. As Levertov writes, to work for peace, a presence, an energy field more intense than war. Thank you for your attention.
Wel, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi, Richard. Oedd e'n werth disgwyl i gael eich clywed chi. Gafon ni'n herio yn y sesiwn blaenorol i fod yn optimistaidd. I chi wedi gwneud rhywun fath, dychmygu y ddelfryd yma o fyd o heddwch, ond beth sy'n arbennig wrth gwrs oherwydd eich maes chi yw bod rhywun yn gobeithio bod gyda chi hefyd yr atebion, y know-how, byddwch chi yn gallu yn harwen ni i wireddu y pethau yma. Ie, mae yna sawl peth yn codi. Ddiddorol, ni nid i sôn bod y llyfrau i gael mewn ieithoedd fel Tsineeg, a chythau'n tynnu'r sylw nad ydyn nhw i'r gael yng Nghymraeg. Un peth sy'n harwy ydy hwnna'n ddarn o waith y gallai yr Academi wneud, sicrhau bod yna rhyw fersiwn syml i ysgolion o leia ar gael, oherwydd drwyddo chi ni wedi dod ar draws Patricia Javier sydd hefyd yn Engineer for Peace yn Mhrifysgol Abertawe. Mae hi yn cynrychioli Abertawe ar y grŵp Academi Heddwch. Ac un o'r pethau ni yn gobeithio i datblygu ydy rhyw gynllun i ysgolion lle byddwn ni yn annog plant o'r cychwyn cyntaf wrth bod nhw'n wneud gyda gwyddoniaeth a pheirianyddiaeth ac yn y blaen, i feddwl am beth yw pen draw yr hyn maen nhw'n ei ddyfeisio o ran heddwch. Cyn dod at gwestiynau, mae'n ambell un wedi dod. Gai just gofyn i chi ailadrodd mater y gyllideb. Nethoch chi, y pwynt o'ch chi'n neud oedd bod lle mae gadwriaethau yn gwario eu harian yn arwydd go glir o beth yw eu blaenoriaeth nhw. Ond nes i golli'r ffigurau, faint o ganrannau. Fysa chi'n fodlon ailadrodd hwnna, please?
Yes, okay. Let me first answer your first question about preparation materials for schools. I'd be very interested in doing that. And I think it's very important that young people consider the ethical implications of the jobs that they take up when they finish their education, whenever that may be. So I'd be very happy to contribute to that.
Oh, there you are.
World military expenditure is enormous. It's at least $2 trillion a year.
How many zeros is that?
There are a lot of zeros in that.
More than I can add, I'm sure. It's a lot.
At least 9 zeros in that. Yeah. That's 2,000 billion a year. Yeah.
And that it was in comparison then with what?
And that's in comparison with, I know for the UK and the USA, that the diplomatic budgets are roughly 7% of the military budgets of both countries. And within those diplomatic budgets, the funds allocated for peacekeeping are about 2% of the military budget. And that's mostly to meet UN obligations. So there's a much greater emphasis on militarization than there is on diplomatic solutions and peace solutions. And budgets are ethical documents. They show where priorities really lie, I think.
Yn hollol. Mae yna ddau gwestiwn yn benodol i chi, Richard, rhaid gofyn nhw nawr, ond hefyd gai annog bobl sydd wedi edrych ar y fideo i fod yn barod i holi Craig, achos mae yna lawer iawn o bethau yn fideo Craig am y cysylltiad rhwng heddwch ag iechyd. Nid lleia wrth gwrs yr enw ar flaen y deml, heddwch ag iechyd. Reit, felly cwestiwn gan Patricia, bydde wedi henwi hi nawr. Mae'n diolch i chi a mae'n gofyn, how can we find spaces in the field of engineering, Richard, to be more human when there is not a strong culture of peace or humanity or connection to each other and the planet? So that's one question.
Yeah, I think the most important thing for engineers to remember is that they're first and foremost human beings, and they live in society, and engineering has a huge effect on how society operates. So it's important in teaching engineering to teach students about this. And as I said, engineering ethics is now included in all engineering courses in the UK. That's been a development over the last decade or so.
Yeah, that's encouraging, isn't it?
Yes.
And Patricia herself is active. Sorry, I'm having questions from phone and from the thing, and I'm not doing a very good job. So first question here was from Ian, and Ian Thomas. Reference was made in the first presentation to the ability to transfer oil and gas across the continent via a pipeline. Is it sensible, practical? Yes, this was sort of my question too, from an engineering perspective, to do the same with clean water. Can we just sort of ship it around?
Well, of course, we do that already to a large extent. Welsh water travels to England, for example, and water can travel further than that. But another solution is that although 2% of the water on the earth is clean, fresh water, there's a lot of seawater around the planet, and a large percentage of the population of the earth live within 10 or 20 kilometers of the sea. So desalination technologies is also an important future contribution to providing water.
And this is Jess Morgan's question. What is the position regarding desalination to provide clean water? Not sure what's meant there by position, but perhaps, you know, the practicality at least of doing that, we know that there are such places, machines, plants that do that.
Yes. Yeah, there's well-established technology for desalination, both thermal desalination, that's using heat to desalinate, and also membrane-based processes for desalination, which are more energy efficient. So this is already used widely in the Middle East and in the United States, in Australia, and many places in the world. The problem for that in many countries, it's a relatively expensive technology compared to the technology levels in developing countries, for example. But the cost is coming down the whole time as the technology becomes better developed. Yeah.
And the Lucas plan, Richard, that's often quoted, but that was back in the 1970s now, if I remember. And I remember listening to one of the engineers or workers there giving a talk, and the mocking, disparaging reaction they had in the time that it was too brown bread and sandals, I think was the sort of the put down. And yet we know that it was a perfectly brilliant plan. But it's not, you mentioned that some of it is happening, but it's not happening in a big and obvious way then, shall we say.
No,
we're still driving engineering by money that tends to come from the arms trade, am I right?
That's quite a lot of engineering is concerned with military equipment. I think in the United States, roughly 20% of engineers are involved in military work of one sort or another. The Lucas plan is from the 1970s, but it was a very innovative plan. And many of the products they came up with as part of that plan have been developed now. Hybrid motors for cars, for example, wind turbines. These are all things that the company could have been producing 40 to 50 years ago.
Yeah, right. Well, mae gwestiwn wedi dod fan hyn I ti, Craig. It's a big question. You couldn't summarize, could you, the links between the two wings of the deml heddwch? Ar y naill llaw oedd gyda ni'r elfen heddwch, pan ych chi'n edrych ar yr adeilad, dwi'n meddwl oedd swyddfeydd hynna i'r chwith a'r pethau mwy amlwg, mae'n ddrwg gen i y pethau iechyd, mwy i'r chwith a'r pethau mwy amlwg heddwch i'r dde, ond wrth gwrs roedd na fan cyfarfod yn y cyntedd yn y canol. Beth yn union oedd yr athroniaeth rhwng dod ar ddau beth na at ei gilydd? Mae'n glamp o gwestiwn, Craig, ond dwi'n gwybod os wyt ti'n gallu crynhoi hwnna.
Okay, so briefly, and this is very relevant actually for the discussion around architecture and engineering, because I think one of the things that's fascinating about the temple is that it was very much designed to try and turn into bricks and mortar the vision and ideals behind peace and health. So founded by, as many will know, with a great deal of support from David Davis, who was one of the philanthropists who had served in the trenches and horrified by his experience of war, but also the scourge of tuberculosis, which at that point killed, was one of the greatest health threats to the population. And so the idea of the Temple of Peace and Health was to serve both as a memorial to the fallen of the First World War, and I should add Spanish flu as well. We often forget that that epidemic happened 100 years ago as well. But a memorial that would serve as a place to bring people together to work to end those. So the North Wing was peace organisations, the Welsh League of Nations Union housed there. The South Wing was the Wales National Memorial Association for the Eradication of Tuberculosis, and the Hall of Nations, or the Hall of Justice as it was once called, as the Great Marble Hall in the centre. And the idea was symbolically that justice would be the product of bringing the people's efforts together, but always remembering the dangers of the past beneath our feet, the crypt of remembrance that houses the World War I Book of Remembrance, there as a symbolic reminder of why we have to do this for future generations, but the inspiration of the temple looking up to the skies above, to the world that we could create in the future. So it's a very symbolic building, very powerful, and I would point you probably to, if you hop onto the website heddwch.cymru, there's a lot of useful resources there that explain the many movements that have worked from. Yeah.
Diolch yn fawr, dwi'n gobeithio bod hwnna yn ateb y cwestiwn, ond i'r cysylltiad yna, a mae'n ddiddorol bod ti'n sôn am justice a peace, cyfiawnder a heddwch yn dod at ei gilydd, ac oedd hwnna'n sylw weles i pan oedd un o'n siaradwyr ni bore yma yn siarad, dath sylw ar y chat yn gweud justice and peace, yay, ynddo fe, a pan i ni'n meddwl am yr nodau datblygu cynaladwy, y Sustainable Development Goals yna, i ni'n cofio rhif 16 ydy lle maen nhw wedi rhoi heddwch a heddwch gyda chyfiawnder ac sefydliadau cryf, dwi'n credu ydy'r geiriau iawn. Mae yna sylw arall i chi, Richard, wedi dod fan hyn, yn gofyn fel hyn, a ydych chi'n ymwybodol o'r gwaith hydro yn Llangenech, technoleg o drop dŵr brwnt, o droi dŵr brwnt yn dŵr glân. Pa mor allweddol yw'r technoleg hon, felly technoleg sydd yn troi dŵr brwnt yn dŵr glân? Gobeithio mai dyna ydy'r cwestiwn. Aled, Eirig, neu di ddadfiwtio os ydw i'n anghywir fyna. A hefyd, sylw gan Hefin yn dweud bod e'n cytuno gyda chi, Richard, ynglyn â'r gorsafoedd di halwyno. Mae'r hynna yn gwbl allweddol, ond wrth gwrs, yr economeg yw'r her. Mae'n siŵr mai gair neis am cash ydy economeg fyna, pwy sy'n mynd i dalu am y pethau yma. Reit, at gwestiwn Aled Eirig. Richard, os newch chi, please.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the specific work there, but there are a range of processes for converting polluted water, brackish water, into drinking water. And that's a much cheaper option than desalination, because the level of materials you want to remove is much less than it is with seawater, which is very high salt content. Yeah.
Right, byddwn ni ddim wedi disgwyl hynna. Cwestiwn gan Gwyn wedyn ar y Q&A. Gyda cymaint yn cael ei wario ar gynhyrchu arfau a chyflogau da, mae'n debyg, sut y dylid perswadio myfyrwyr i beidio defnyddio eu sgiliau i'r defnydd yma? Mae hwnna'n her, yn dywe, mae'r myfyrwyr, a falle byddai Patricia ar yw sylw ar hwnna, os dyw myfyrwyr yn gweld bod yna gyflog da i gael, sut allwn ni perswadio nhw i beidio cymryd y cyflog, os ydy'r gwaith nhw yn mynd i arwen at greu rhywbeth treisgar? Richard.
Yeah, I think that the most important ethical decision that young people make is choosing their first job when they finish their education. And we need to put a lot more emphasis into choosing that job carefully, because that will very often lead to a career that goes in a certain direction. So that's something that's not been emphasized very much in schools and universities, whereas you rightly say, getting a good salary is often the first priority. But doing socially useful work, I think, should be an important priority for young people. And many of them realize that. I think things are changing in that direction.
Gai ofyn cwestiwn i chi, pa mor ymarferol ydych chi'n meddwl y bydde gweld Cymru yn datblygu i fod yn wlad lle mae y diwydiannau sydd yn gyfredol ynghlwm â'r diwydiant arfer yn cael ei dargyfeirio, i arallgyfeirio, fel bod ni'n wlad sydd yn defnyddio yn doniau a'n adnoddau ni, mwyn creu cymdeithas heddychlon a iach yn hytrach na chyfrannu at arfogi'r byd. Ydy hwnna'n, is that a practical imagining?
This comes to a question of politics very often, and incentives to companies to work in certain directions. And I think if the Welsh Assembly government were to take this on as an important initiative, then Wales could be a good place to start this sort of work.
Craig, there's a question to you, but you want to ask a question yourself. So you can ask yours first and then I'll pose the question to you.
Okay, actually, it was just an interesting add-on to something that Richard was saying just now about that first career choice and impetus. And I think one thing I'd maybe add to that is I think many of our organisations can help in that. Often those first career choices are somewhat restricted in terms of the amount of power that a student might have to be able to dictate that. But the opportunity to get work experience and to gain an understanding of organisations and movements who do try to work for positive change, I think can give them the confidence to take that knowledge into organizations and create change from within as well. And so I know you can't turn BP around overnight if you end up in there, but actually, I've seen a lot of very inspiring examples of young people scooting into organizations and then sort of changing the cultures collectively. And I think that's something that we can all help facilitate and is very much within Wales's soft power and ability to support.
Yes, yeah, I think that's an important point, because employment possibilities for engineers, for example, are changing. Some decades ago, they would mostly have gone into very big multinational companies. Now they're more often going into small and medium-sized enterprises. And if you join a really big company as a young person, you have very little influence over the direction in which the company moves. But if you join a small or medium-sized company, and even from your first job, you have a range of responsibilities that gives you some opportunity to look at the direction in which the company is going and propose alternatives. And a lot of the companies in Wales are the small, medium-sized companies, which is maybe why Wales is well placed to produce changes in this area.
Mae hwnna'n hyfryd iawn. Mae gen i broblem dechnegol, felly dwi'n troi fan hyn at Nel a Gamira. Nath rhywbeth fflachio ar hyd y gwaelod yn dweud bod Robin Gwyndaf wedi codi law, ond fedrai ddim gweld Robin Gwyndaf, felly dwi'n gwybod os modd i annog Robin i roi gwestiwn yn y Q&A, neu os allwch chi gael y cwestiwn o'r rwle. Yn y cyfamser, mae yna gwestiwn wedi dod gan Dr Hugh Griffiths fan hyn, yn dweud gyda'r cwricwlwm newydd yng Nghymru yn dechrau ym mis Medi, bydde fe'n awyddus iawn i weld ysgolion yn dysgu'r pethau hyn yn y dosbarth. Ydych chi'n gwybod am unrhyw wlad yn y byd sy'n gwneud hyn yn dda? Wel, dwi'n meddwl am Costa Rica, dwi'n gwybod bod nhw wedi cael gwared ar ei gwariant milwrol a wedi dargyfeirio hwnna i iechyd ag addysg. Dwi'n yn gwybod, falle nad oes na wledydd eraill, falle mai dyma yw cyfrifoldeb Cymru. Craig, tithau yn adnabod y maes addysg a heddwch yn dda. Richard, chithau hefyd yn amlwg. Os rhywun yn gall helpu rhoi esiampl i Hew, sydd i hunan, fel dwi'n digwydd bod yn gwybod, yn athrog yn ymgynghorydd addysg.
I mean, my immediate first thought on seeing your question was just to flag up some of the fantastic work that's being piloted through the Wales's Peace School scheme. I've just popped a link there, and whilst that's again being facilitated through people linked to the Temple, Academy Heddwch, and some of our organisations, a lot of that work is actually being done in schools in Wales by teachers, by children, unpicking these big issues. So I think that's beautiful. Great. There are, I think, some of the best learning opportunities, I think, are with places like Flanders and the Ireland Islands, other sort of devolved parts of nations elsewhere where they've also taken similar initiatives. I don't know if Richard or Mairead would like to build on that a little.
Llai ddod o'n rhannu fel Academy Heddwch bod ni wedi cael sawl cyfarfod gyda sefydliad heddwch debyg yn yr Oland ac yn Flandres. diolch yn bennaf i gysylltiadau gyda Jill Evans pan i ddyddiau hi yn y Senedd yn Ewrop. Ond dwi ddim yn siŵr i ba raddau maen nhw'n gweithio gyda'r ysgolion fel y cyfryw. Lle ffeindio mas. Richard?
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with the schools, but it's certainly the case that these academies or related institutions in smaller countries like Sweden, for example, and in Norway, have been very influential on well outside their borders on a worldwide basis in promoting peace. And I think Wales fits into that sort of picture. It's as being a relatively small country that can change its outlook, perhaps larger than a big country can. I think the Americans, for example, have great difficulty in understanding the idea of peace engineering. I mean, some of them do, but generally speaking, the USA is such a militarized country from its industrial viewpoint that it's very difficult to get a message across and properly understood there.
I wonder if I just maybe briefly add a nice story from history to illustrate Wales's power here. One of the things we've been unpicking recently is the creation of UNESCO, which, and this really classically illustrates Richard's point, actually, that it was a group of Welsh educationalists within World War II who were approached by ministers with the Allied powers to develop proposals and a constitution for an international education organization, precisely because the work that had been done in Wales in the 20s and 30s by Welsh teachers and schools, and the speed with which they were able to pull that together was far greater than the bigger bodies and so on. And so actually UNESCO was born from Welsh ideas, a hidden history not well known.
Diolch yn fawr, Craig, a falle mae hwnna bydde wedi bod yr ateb i'r cwestiwn oedd gen i ti, sef beth yw un o'r uchafbwyntiau ti wyt ti wedi darganfod yn dy waith ar hanes y deml heddwch. Mae hwnna'n sicr yn gorfod bod yn un ohonyn nhw. Mae problem fach gyda ni, a un broblem yw mae 2 funud o'n hamser ni sy ar ôl, a dwi ddim eisiau cadw bobl. Robin, dwi ddim yn gwybod sych chi'n ynghlywed i. Nel, oes yna rhyw ffordd bod ni'n gallu agor y meic? Dwi'n gwybod webinar yw hwn, nid Zoom cyffredin, ond os diw Robin... dyma ni. Robin, hoffech chi ofyn eich cwestiwn os ydych chi ddim yn medru teipio yr cwestiwn? Dwi ddim yn clywed, Robin, Nel, dwi ddim yn gwybod os...
Ie, rwy ddim yn clywed chwaith. Rwy wedi gwahodd Robin i unmutio.
Reit, Robin, os ych chi moyn siarad, ni'n gallu gweld bod chi wedi codi'ch llaw, bydd rhaid i chi wasgu'r bwtwm bach dadfiwtio dyfotwm, dwi'n meddwl, oedd y gynghanedd, ond dwi'n mynd eich galw chi'n tŷ, felly mae hwnna'n lledwyth i fi. Na, dyn ni ddim yn eich clywed chi, mae'n ddrwg iawn gen i am hynny.
Robin, mae croeso i chi e-bostio ni gyda'ch cwestiwn os bydd hwnna'n well, a gallwn ni dod nôl ato fe yn hwyrach yn y gynhadledd.
Dyna ni. Nel, dwi ti dy hunan ddim yn gallu dadmwtio, Robin?
Na, rwy ddim yn gallu gwahodd ei dadmwtio, sori.
Reit, wel, i fod yn glir, felly, Robin, mae yna wahoddiad i chi i ddadfiwtio eich hunan, sef gwasgu'r botwm mute fel bod ni'n gallu eich clywed chi, a dylen ni wedyn fod yn gallu gwrando eich cwestiwn. Os nad yw hwnna'n bosib. Wel, dyna ni, mae'r hyn bethau yma technegol mae'n dod ar yn tras ni. Bydd rhaid i fi ddirwyn y cyfarfod i ben, gawn ni glywed y cwestiwn eto, fi'n siŵr bydd yn panelwyr ni'n fodlon ateb, falle dros e-bost os cael ofyn hwnna i chi. Ond yn y cyfamser, diolch o waelod calon. Os nad ych chi wedi gweld fideo Craig, plis ewch i weld mae'r ddolen wedi rannu a gallwch chi edrych ar wefan y deml heddwch a chael at hwnna. Fersiwn yn Saesneg, fersiwn yn Gymraeg, yn llawn gwybodaeth. Diolch Craig am ymuno gyda ni bore yma, a diolch arbennig hefyd i'r athro Richard Bowen am y cyfraniad ac am agor y drws a chreu cysylltiadau i ni fan hyn, a dwi'n sicr sicr. Bydd hwn yn llwybr, bydd yr Academi Heddwch yn gobeithio i ddilyn ymhellach. Felly dyna ni, croeso i bawb gael paned bach nawr a dod yn ôl erbyn chwarter i hanner dydd, pan bydd Aled Eirig yn cadeirio panel sydd yn edrych ar heddwch, iechyd a phobl y cyrion. Bydd Lynwen yn cyfieithu, felly diolch i ti Heledd am ymuno gyda ni bore yma. Hwyl i chi nawr.